So this represents one book, and the green lines are going towards the right vanishing point, the red lines towards the left vanishing point, and this is just to help you visualize this a little bit more. One thing that I want you to notice is that this, based upon the three rules of cubes that we discussed, this sits right on the vertical horizon. So this corner right here sits right in between where the left vanishing point, which is obviously off our screen, and the right vanishing point, it's right in the middle of that. And so you can look at a couple of things and see how this follows our rules. One is that the angle is equal. The other is that the rate of convergence, which you see is very slow. One of the things that maybe we didn't emphasize enough is that most of the objects that we draw as industrial designers are going to be smaller than we are, and therefore they'll sit below the horizon line. But notice how far away those vanishing points are. There's very, very little convergence. And the closer you are to an object, the quicker the rate of convergence. So this looks like a book, maybe stacked on a table that is a couple of feet away from us. But as I rotate it up, and we see a lot of the top of this book, and as I rotate this book up, notice what happens with the vanishing lines, and the horizon line starts to come into play. And so when I rotate it up enough, even though that horizon line is not flat, when we get to the point where it's in the middle of our book, it should be flat. And so notice also that those vanishing points do ultimately end up on the horizon line. So if my books are stacked close to eye level, I'll see something more like this, where I see less of the top of the book and more of the sides of the book. The further below the horizon line, or the more I'm looking down on them, the more that I would see the top of the book, and therefore I'd have a steeper angle. So even though this is still very close to the center of the horizon line, depending upon how far down I look at the object, that's what's going to determine how steep the angles are, even though they're the same right now, or how shallow they are relative to where that horizon line is. So if I take another book, well, let me just grab this book, and I'm going to rotate it, and notice what happens to my vanishing lines as I rotate this book. So it's no longer sitting right in between the left and the right vanishing point. That left vanishing point is coming closer, so I'm moving my vanishing points by rotating this book. And the right vanishing point is going off even further into the distance, and you can begin to see an increase in the rate of convergence that this needs to take to get to that horizon line out there. And you can maybe see, although it's hard to decipher, that there's less of a rate of convergence, a smaller rate of convergence for the vanishing lines going towards the right. So just watch again while we rotate this. Very close to even. If we rotate it the other way, now the right vanishing point is coming closer to my object. The rate of convergence is increasing, and the angle is increasing going towards that right vanishing point. This angle is decreasing. I've put a couple of other books in here, and let's just see what happens if I rotate this book on top of it. Notice again, well, you can see a little bit of an increase in the rate of convergence here compared to here, and you can see a decrease in the rate of convergence for the second book here compared to the first book. But also notice the angles, right? So there's a shallower angle with this line and a steeper angle with that line. Now I'm going to add another book that's rotated in the opposite direction. So see how this is increased? That angle is steeper, this angle is shallower, this rate of convergence has decreased. So one other thing I want to talk about very quickly. and you'll notice compared to just a moment ago, I've got this in rendering mode, which allows me to adjust the camera focal length. But there's a little bit more convergence. My focal length has changed, and basically increasing the focal length is very similar to, let's say, putting a fisheye lens on a camera. And so watch what happens as I adjust the focal length of the camera. And what this maybe simulates is pulling that book closer to my eye. But notice that the perspective has been exaggerated. And there are times where maybe you want to exaggerate the perspective to create a more dynamic drawing. But right now, we want to think about those vanishing points, at least in this exercise, being a lot further away. They're not sitting on the page. Your page for this exercise probably would be somewhere in here. So this book in particular would not have either vanishing point on an 11 by 14 sheet of paper. But if we put the vanishing points on the page, it exaggerates that perspective to the point where this no longer looks real. It looks a little bit distorted. In fact, I guess I can go further, and that's a little crazy. But if you have your vanishing points on the page, these look like they would hit the horizon line somewhere about right here and right here. And that may actually fit on your page, but this is exaggerated. And so we want to draw these books and sketch these books with a little less exaggeration. So that means that most of your vanishing points would be off your page. An exception to that might be if you see one side of the book a lot more and it's rotated in a way like this, where you could see that this horizon line is probably somewhere up here, and these points would ultimately meet somewhere about right here, which may land on your page.